Hello, my name is Brandon Peters, and I am a mediator and an arbitrator with Upchurch Watson White Max Mediation Group. And my firm today, in conjunction with the University of Florida Levin College of Law Institute for Dispute Resolution, is proud to sponsor today's webinar, which is entitled Insights from a Former Congressional Candidate: How Running for Public Office Can Help You in Your Practice. And it is intended to be a course to help not just folks who practice law, but really folks who are mediators or really any professional could benefit from this course. And so I'm here to try and shed some light on a subject that might be a mystery to some folks. This is me. I am the mediator and former candidate for United States Congress. I ran in the Democratic primary in Florida's 2nd Congressional District in 2018. And I'll tell you more about my race as we go on. But these were just some of the fun shots that we took as a campaign along the way. One of them shows me in my native country side of Levy County, where I live with my wife and our 4 dogs. They're off to the right. You see my wife, Stacy, and I walking up our half-mile-long dirt driveway. We truly live in the country. All our neighbors, other than the critters, are watermelon farmers, peanut farmers, and blueberry farmers. And we live out in longleaf pine, where there's pileated woodpeckers and just all kinds of neat wildlife. We even got a panther roaming around. And there you see in the picture on the bottom left, me and some of the constituents in the 2nd Congressional District in a local diner in my hometown, Williston, Florida. And that's in the Gulf Hammock region of the state of Florida, right on the Gulf of Mexico. I live about 18 miles from the Gulf of Mexico. So how can running for public office help you in your practice as a mediator or as an arbitrator or as an attorney? Well, first of all, the 2016 election, November 8th, 2016, I was not thrilled with the outcome, but I wasn't thrilled with the choices that I had either. And needless to say, November 9th was a difficult day for me. And for months, I complained and tweeted and posted things on Facebook that really didn't do much to advance the social or political discourse about that which made me unhappy. And, you know, my wife one day said, "Brandon, why don't you do something instead of complaining on social media? Why don't you do something other than yell at our poor television set?" I was a bit of an MSNBC junkie, although I also take a healthy diet of Fox and CNN and PBS. But she said, "Why don't you do something other than yell at our television set and complain on social media and be productive for positive change in our nation?" And I said, "All right, let me think about that." And so I slept on it, and the next day I woke up and I told my wife, I said, "Stacy, I've got it. I accept your challenge. I'm going to run for the United States Congress." And she looked at me funny and she said, "Brandon, that's not exactly what I had in mind." So there we were, off to the races, literally, running in Florida's largest, most rural, and poorest congressional district. Florida has 67 counties. 19 of them are in the 2nd Congressional District in part or in whole. My county, home county, Levy County, is in its entirety in that congressional district. Marion County, where I am recording this audio, actually is one of the 5 partial counties in the district, but it's very rural, lots of agriculture, a lot of country folks, and I'm proud to count myself amongst them. But knowing how people are, understanding that the district includes both metropolitan folks and people that live in the country was very important to putting up a fight and being a good candidate. You know, the hazards of television and social media were not lost on me. And not only did it lead my wife to challenge me, but it also caused me to need to clean up my own Twitter tweets and Facebook posts and Instagram videos, and really made me more mindful about the way that others view my presence in social media. And much as a mediator needs to come across as conscientiously unbiased, as a neutral and impartial person, so must a political candidate if he or she is to be truly effective in winning the hearts and the minds of the electorate. And so one of the funny things that happened during my campaign was my campaign manager, my campaign consultants took control of my Twitter account and my Instagram account. And the only dignity I had left on social media was that I maintained control of my Facebook account, personal Facebook account, but they had control of my campaign Facebook account. So I was essentially frozen out of social media. All that has been since returned to me, but there was a period of time, 6 months of my life, when I felt like I was in the cyber wilderness. And it's because my campaign team wanted to make sure that the messaging was not corrupted by my own crabby attitude on any given day about something that was coming out of Washington, D.C. from the leaders of one party or the other. One of the things you need to do at the beginning of a campaign is similar to that which we do when we get a new case. We talk to our partners, we talk to other lawyers that we like and we respect, and find out what they think about the case. Have they had any similar experiences with the case? How do they think I should approach the case? We do this as mediators too. If we are truly inclusive in our mediation, and I like to think that I am, the way I practice mediation, you know, we talk to other mediators in advance to prepare for an upcoming engagement. We talk to the attorneys, we talk to the parties at the appropriate times, both before and sometimes in advance, to make sure that they feel included in the process. And I knew if I was going to succeed in this massive undertaking, and I had never run for anything before. I have family members who had run for things before. I had a family member who was Secretary of Defense. I had a family member who was a local city commissioner, and everything in between. I had never run for anything before, and so what do? The very first thing I run for was the United States House of Representatives seat in the largest congressional district in Florida. This district is so big, ladies and gentlemen, it's bigger than 7 states in this country. It's bigger than Delaware, it's bigger than New Jersey, New Hampshire, Vermont. It's bigger than Massachusetts and Rhode Island combined. And I'm sure I'm missing 1 or 2 other, but it's just a 13,000 square mile district is just beyond comprehension. Most congressional districts in this country aren't 10% of that size. I mean, it's just huge. So I talked to my family and my friends and sought their counsel and advice about whether I should do this. And I got a lot of encouragement. Obviously, my wife nudged me, but I went in a much harder direction than she had intended. And it's important to survey third parties because people see us differently than we see ourselves. And I found this exercise of kind of canvassing my best friends going back to high school and college and law school and family members, you know, really an invaluable insight into how folks view me. And they were very encouraging. If you're going to run for office and you're married, I will tell you that it's extremely important that you have buy-in by your spouse. This is not a one-man operation. It's not a one-woman show. You need the full support of your spouse if you're going to do this and do it well. And when it came to my old friends, particularly in college, I needed their financial buy-in. You know, they would encourage me, yeah, this sounds like something you should do. You're the kind of guy who's reasonable and can bring some sense to Washington, D.C. We think you ought to do it. Well, the next step in that process is, well, do you think that so much that you'd be willing to contribute to my campaign. So you need to be willing to ask folks to contribute financially, family members and friends that some of whom you might not have spoken with in 30 years, which was the case with me. And so a lot of calls were kind of funny. Hey, it's Brandon Peters. I know we haven't spoken since law school, but I'm running for Congress and I could sure use your support financially. You know, you need to meet people where they are. You need to engage them, find out how they're doing, find out how their families are doing, find out how their practice is going, and engage them before the big ask. But you also don't want to get bogged down trying to catch up on 30 years of minutia. What we call call time in elections is extremely important, and you have to be dedicated and focused to an efficient use of your time. No call should last more than 15 minutes, and if you ever become a candidate yourself, and I encourage all of you to think about it, call time must be efficiently run. So should somebody want to talk with you longer than that 15 minutes, just tell them, hey, I've got a whole list of people I've got to call through and I'd love to talk to you more. Can we set a time when we can loop back around when I'm not on the clock and talk further and set a time for one night after you're finished on the campaign trail or some weekend when they have time for you. Well, one of the things I learned, one of the questioners asked me, if there's a few things that you could share with the audience, things you wish you had known before you became a candidate but didn't know. One of them is when you start a congressional campaign, you're actually starting a small business. Another one is that if you're going to start on a campaign for the United States Congress, you need to start real early, like probably 2 years in advance. And the last one is whatever financial targets you end up hitting are much different than what you thought you were going to have to hit when you started off. So let's take those in order, reverse order. First off, I thought I was going to go into this race and spend about $10,000 of my own largesse. My wife and I talked about it. We decided that's how much we could allocate from our own treasury because, you know, if you're asking other folks to spend their hard-earned money on you, you know, it's important that they know you've got some skin in the game. So you need to be willing to pony up. Footnote that, we'll come back to it later. Next thing is the idea that you're having to run a small business. You know, when I joined Upchurch Watson and closed my small firm practice, I thought my days of payroll were over. I thought my days of reading lease agreements and buying commercial general liability insurance for my office were over. Well, all of those things were back in play when I opened my campaign office in Marion County, Florida. They were back in play when I hired enough staff to need to hire a payroll company, and so many staff at one point that we actually needed to go down the road for workers' comp insurance. So these are the hallmarks of a small business. And so here I was back in business again, congressional candidate Brandon Peters. But the last thing I will emphasize to you, and I can't stress this enough, is if you're going to do it, don't do it half-heartedly. Jump into the pool with both feet and do it far enough in advance that you can plan your campaign, talk to the third parties whose input you value, and raise the money it's going to take to mount a successful effort at the office you seek. The timing is critical. You need to know such things as the campaign budget that you must map out. And I sought the advice of campaign professionals. I hired consultants. I hired a campaign manager, and it's much like hiring litigation experts. You know, I'm a civil trial lawyer. I practiced civil trial law for 26 years, tried dozens of cases. If you're going to hire a litigation expert, you listen to them. You hire these people, you pay them good money. You might as well listen to them. If you're going to hire them and ignore their advice, you might as well not hire them to begin with. And campaign professionals are the same. So my campaign professionals helped me to map out a budget. I followed their advice and sought to do some fundraising that would allow me to meet the very large budget that we needed to run successfully for United States Congress. I wish I knew more about how to raise money in advance of the campaign. The experts that you hire can teach you that. You just got to hire the right ones. They taught me how to do that. Same folks that helped me plan the budget. And they also tell you how to spend the money that you raise. So in our district, for example, we decided not to run any television ads because it's such a large rural district and many folks don't have television. Satellite dishes in the country in the poorest congressional district in the state of Florida are few and far between. Obviously, the cable companies don't string cable out there. So, you know, you have some people with aerial antennas. If you are going to run television ads, you want to make sure you stay off of cable and go with the local stations because people can pick those up with their aerial antenna. But we didn't do any television at all. We made the tactical decision to go with radio, text ad campaigns, and Facebook and Twitter and other social media ad campaigns. And we really targeted that stuff to the rural counties. It worked quite effectively, but only because I had a team of people did I even know that we should take that approach, let alone how effective it would be. The other thing I meant to mention is that you need to know the important dates and deadlines. And the only way you do this is get started way in advance. For example, for running in the state of Florida as a congressional candidate, there's a date by which you can qualify for the ballot. And you qualify either by paying $10,400, half of which goes to the party you're running for, and half of which goes to the state of Florida Department of State. You need to know that that takes place in late April of the election year. You also need to know dates and deadlines for getting in front of the petition drive to sign petitions and submit them to the supervisors of elections if you choose to qualify by petition. So in my case, in my race, there's about 5,000 petitions needed. You have to have them all in order. They have to be valid signatures, and they must be submitted and approved by the supervisors of elections in the counties where the voter resides by early April. And so I made the decision early on. There wasn't enough time. We weren't going to do the petitions. We were just going to raise the money, spend the money, and qualify by paying by check, which is what we did. So these types of dates and deadlines are important. There's other more subtle dates and deadlines. For example, the different papers will allow you, major print publications will allow you as a candidate to submit editorials, usually one for the primary and one for the general, on an issue of your choosing. Well, you need to know what's the date to get that in to the paper, and you need to have campaign staff to do that. So if you really want to take over the discussion in the political landscape in your race, mapping out all of the relevant dates and deadlines is important. You know, in my very rural district, we had a lot of what I'll call hillbilly holidays. You know, so the one county would have its possum festival, and another county would have its honey festival, and another county would have some kind of worm grunting festival. Don't ask me what that is, but there's all these events you need to attend, and knowing when those take place, knowing where they take place, and how to register and reserve a table. These are all things that you need to know way in advance of actually jumping into the race. So I jumped into this race terribly late. Before you become a candidate, it's really important that you take a personal inventory of your strengths and your weaknesses to determine if it's right for you. You have to have a fundamental belief in your cause. I believed that our country was heading in a bad direction after the November 2016 elections, not just the party in control, but my own party, the Democratic Party. I thought needed some vital change, and I wanted to be part of the engine of change, positive change, productive input into a system that I saw as badly flawed. And you also have to believe in yourself. You know, you have to have some self-confidence that you can be the engine of that change. And I did, and I still do. You need to have a financial commitment to running for office. Personal financial stability is critical. because when you're out on the campaign trail, you're not trying cases if you're an attorney. You're not visiting with clients if you're an attorney. You're meeting with local elected officials. You're meeting with the heads of partisan organizations. You are shaking hands with constituents, showing up at, as in my case, the Fiddler Crab Festival in beautiful Steenhatchee. These are opportunity costs that will prevent you from making money. And so how do you live during the period of time that you're not mediating a case if you're a mediator, or trying a case if you're a trial attorney? You have to have some measure of savings. I mean, my wife and I lived off of our savings for a period of time, and it was expensive. It was a lot more expensive than the $10,000 we thought we were going to have to invest in this race, and you got to be prepared for that. So no matter what you budget, it's going to be worse, I promise you. But the reality of it differs by individual. Some folks have the temperament to spend more. Some folks have the temperament to save more. And some folks will spend whatever it takes not to be beaten, and come hell or high water, they'll make sure they find a way to raise the money. But it'll also differ by your race. You know, some races cost $1 million to run, some cost less than that, and some cost a whole lot more. Campaigning is chaotic, very similar to trying a case. You know, we often hear the old adage, there is no perfect trial. Well, there is no perfect campaign. There's going to be mess ups, there's going to be hiccups, and there's going to be a lot of them. And how you adapt to those shifting sands will, as in trial, determine your ultimate success as a candidate. And so you have to have a certain willingness to learn and grow. You know, sometimes as a trial attorney, I get a bit compartmentalized in my thinking, a bit rigid in my approach and preparation, my planning for the inevitable. But, you know, all those plans go out the window as soon as you start picking a jury. Well, so it is with campaigning. You know, you may have the perfect speech set up and you're going to be given 10 minutes. And as in my case, I show up for such a speaking engagement in a hostile forum, and people that didn't necessarily like me as a candidate had brought in a different candidate to speak from a Florida State Senate race, and he took up all my speaking time. And so most of my time there was really just shaking hands and saying hello to people and trying to be pleasant, even though I was very annoyed that this had happened. But you have to be willing to learn and grow and adapt. I had to tap into deep reserves of patience in working with my staff, most of whom were millennials. You know, millennials are different in the way they view the world from a guy like me who was born in the 60s. They're far less organized. You know, trying to get my campaign manager to calendar things, remember dates and deadlines was like pulling teeth. And I stressed to him the importance of dates and deadlines, particularly the premium I placed on them as an attorney, because, you know, if you miss that deadline for filing your appellate brief, it's over and you're going to get sued for malpractice. Well, to get millennials to think along those lines it's no mean feat. And so finally I found this cool app called Trello. I put my millennial campaign manager on it and had him use it. And it was quite effective in helping me keep track of him and what he was doing, and also what I needed him to do that wasn't getting finished. So the other thing about millennials, this is pretty cool, is their social media skills. I talked to you a little bit earlier about doing advertising on social media. You know, I have not the foggiest idea how to set up Twitter and Instagram ads to appear, you know, next Thursday at 4 o'clock when it's prime viewing time. And how to trip all the wires to make it viral or as close to viral as possible. I mean, well, the millennials, they know all this stuff. In fact, I'll tell you, I got to know a lot of candidates, a lot of campaign staff throughout the state of Florida. I met with tons of them over the course of the campaign season. And the conclusion I was left with is that in congressional campaigns, it's 20-somethings and 30-somethings that rule the roost. It's the staff. They know what's going on. They know how to get things done. In Senate campaigns or gubernatorial campaigns, it's 30-somethings and 40-somethings. And when you get up to the rare air of presidential politics, it's folks in their 40s and 50s who are generally the consultants and the managers who are running the show. And so you need to be prepared for the staff that you have to work with. And in my case, that required a lot of patience because they all didn't have the compartmentalized world that I do as a trial attorney. So willingness to learn and grow is really an important trait that you must have to succeed as a candidate. And through time, I got to be a much better candidate. There's some distinct professional advantages of being a candidate, and that kind of dovetails nicely with the title of this presentation today. And I wanted to kind of click through those with you. Number one, to succeed as a lawyer or to succeed as a mediator or as an arbitrator, you really need to be good at active listening. What is active listening? Well, it's listening so that the other person truly feels heard. It's listening so that the other person genuinely appreciates that you care what they feel, what they think, because if they sense empathy from you, what you're going to get back from them is rapport. Empathy is what you feel, rapport is what they feel, and it's with that rapport that you can work together with folks as a mediator to craft a solution to a problem. It's with your clients that rapport is so critical as their advocate, as their advisor, as their counselor, in coming up with ways to help them with whatever brought them to your law firm to begin with. So being a great active listener in the law office is a little different from being a great active listener on the campaign trail. And my wife brought this to my attention. She said, Brandon, people are asking you questions and you talk over them when you answer. I said, well, what do you mean? They're asking me a question, they want my answer. She said, no, anybody that's asking you a question seems to be asking you because they have something about the subject of inquiry that they really want to share with you. It's not necessarily about what you think. And I said, okay, that's a little different. So I started forcing myself to talk less and listen more. And it's true, a lot of folks on the campaign trail don't approach you as this great fountain of wisdom as a candidate. They've got something that concerns them on a particular issue, and they need to get it off their chests. And their asking you a question is merely a vehicle to open the door for them to share something important with you. And so you need to understand that about people on the campaign trail, and by being more mindful of letting others speak, I think we perfect our skill of cross-examining someone at a deposition, getting at the underlying concerns parties are expressing at a mediation, finding when somebody's contradicting himself on the witness stand. These are all things that I used as a trial attorney, but they required active listening. And it's a little bit different from the active listening you do in the courtroom when you're out on the campaign trail. Folks want to know that you feel their pain, and they really only at the end of their own discourse want you to tell you what your own thoughts are on a particular subject. Being a good active listener will help you decide on your campaign team discussions which policies you're going to emphasize in the campaign. So in my campaign, healthcare was a huge issue. The minimum wage was a big issue. Agriculture and the needs of the agricultural community, another big issue. These are the kinds of kitchen table issues, economic security issues, that really are on the minds of people that live in the 2nd Congressional District. And not surprisingly, it is the poorest congressional district in the state of Florida, and people are barely getting by. Actually, they're not even treading water. They're slipping beneath the surface and drowning at sea. And, you know, by doing my research, realizing that most of the counties in my district were actually worse off than they were at the lowest point of the recession, that was important to connecting with these folks and understanding which policies we needed to emphasize during the campaign. You know, I said many times that the billionaires got their tax cut, but the next one goes to the middle class and working families of Florida. Folks liked that, and I told them I'd work very hard to make sure that I did my part in Congress to support and work with people that wanted to make the next tax cut that for the middle class and working families. So deciding which policies to emphasize really requires you to listen to folks and understand their needs. Being a good candidate requires a lot of public speaking, not surprisingly, and I'm not shy. I speak in different venues a lot. I lecture at seminars, I give webinars, obviously. I speak in courtrooms to any number of judges, clients, opposing counsel. I speak every day for a living. And yet speaking is very different from trial. No matter what you say or how you say it, in politics, you're going to irritate somebody. Somebody's going to really like what you say, and somebody's going to be really irritated with you, whether it's in your own party or the other party, or most often both. You know, you got to be very mindful of your words and take great caution in choosing those words wisely. You need to know your audience. And in my case, in this district that I was running in, the audience I would address in Leon County, Tallahassee, was a bit different than the audience that I would address in some of the other counties like Calhoun County or Franklin County. And so I might have the same subject matter in a speech, but I needed to change the way I expressed my views to fit the audience of the county where I was located. And I tell you, I spent so much time on the campaign trail. It wasn't often easy to remember on any given day whether I was waking up in Liberty County or Jefferson County, whether I was in a Days Inn or in my own bed back home in Levy County. I mean, it's very disorienting to run for office and have to travel as much as I did. So there's geographic differences that are important in public speaking. You know, the voters in my 16 poor, rural, not densely populated counties don't tend to have the same needs, fears, concerns as the folks in the big cities, namely Panama City and Tallahassee, which were the major population centers of my congressional district. Appreciating the differences in the media between those two cities was important. You know, the media market in Panama City included the Panama City News Herald. That was a major publication, the major newspaper, and it's very conservative. It's owned by a conservative family, and the way they think and the way you word things will be handled differently than if you're in Tallahassee, where it's a more progressive newspaper, and the folks there speak a completely different language. Tallahassee Democrat, the major publication there, you know, you wanted to give the same interview differently to reporters from one paper or the other. And so it went also with the television market. So I would be out on the trail, I'd be interviewed for something in Panama City. I would word things differently, emphasize different points, whether I was in Bay County, which is where Panama City is, or Leon County. So you need to appreciate subtle geographical differences. And I think I became a more mindful public speaker, and it translates to the practice of law or the practice of mediation, because you really need to know your audience at a granular level, and it required me to do so. I alluded earlier to one of our successes, overcoming a lack of name recognition. You know, when we started off my campaign with only 7.5 months to go to the primary, I had zero name recognition. We ran a poll and I had no name recognition. Nobody had ever heard of me outside of a handful of friends and neighbors in my home county. And so by the end of the campaign, we ran a poll and I had achieved 88% name recognition. And a lot of the folks that knew me now are other professionals. Some of them are farmers. Some of them are union members, day laborers, and made so many friends, hundreds of friends, probably thousands of friends on the campaign trail. And it was a wonderful experience. And getting to meet this many people in and of itself was its own reward. But going from 0% name recognition to 88% name recognition over the course of 7.5 months with the help of my campaign team was simply a staggering and phenomenal achievement. Now, we knew from the beginning that my opponent in the primary wasn't the man I was running against. It was name recognition. My job was to get as good a name recognition as we could, and we achieved that and came really, really close to winning the congressional primary in my first ever political endeavor. You know, why do we do things like become a patron of an arts organization like the Shakespeare Festival in Orlando, where I grew up? Why do we join the board of a charitable organization and sit on that board for nearly 15 years like I did when I was a member of the board of directors of the Florida Safety Council? Why do we do these things? We don't get paid for them. They consume hours of our time, and it's because it gives us a good feeling. We're making a meaningful civic contribution, and for the same reason that you do these things, for the same reason that you might be a board member at your local theater, you should also consider running for office, because it gives you a truly wonderful feeling to contribute to the political discussion that affects many, many people's daily lives. It gives them an outlet for their own concerns, and it really is a wonderful and rewarding experience, but it's got its downsides as well. And so I can't talk about the pluses without also addressing some of the minuses. There are professional disadvantages of being a candidate. You know, it takes time away from your family and friends. One of the things I always told my law clients was, you know, avoid litigation if at all possible. I know you're mad about whatever it is that brought you to my office and you'd love to exact revenge, but you know, you're going to spend a lot of time away from work, a lot of time preparing for trial with me on the weekends, time away from your family, and it's oftentimes not worth it. It's one of the reasons I became a mediator, is to help people avoid the gauntlet of litigation. You know, I was spending up to 4 days or more per week on the road for 7.5 months. And as I mentioned, it's very disorienting. So a lot like going to trial or getting into litigation, getting into campaign mode. If you got young kids and it's not just a local race where you can sleep at home every night, I don't recommend it. And it's expensive. You know, that $10,000 we were expecting to spend, we spent over $50,000 of our own treasury so that I could run for Congress. And thank God we had it, but it hurt. And when we budgeted for 10 and spent 5 times that, let me tell you, I've had some lengthy discussions with my wife since about whether we would have done it again and how we would do it differently. And I'm happy to tell you, we both found it so rewarding that we both would absolutely do it again. My wife's a fierce campaigner. My goodness, I'd be out pumping gas at a local Circle K, and she'd drag people over off of the park bench to meet me, and I, you know, couldn't even get a moment of anonymity at the gas pump when my wife was saying, hey, you know, you need to meet Fred Jones here, and I gave him one of your flyers. I mean, she was just an inveterate campaigner, so much so that I got frustrated and told her I was just going to let her be the candidate at some point. She was really, really good, and man, without Stacy, I'm sure I wouldn't have done as well as I did. But a risk of getting out on the campaign trail, you know, we always hear don't talk about religion and politics. You know, you're going to be expressing some firm political views. People don't want wishy-washy candidates. They want people who know what they stand for and aren't afraid to stand up for what they believe. And I'm one of those guys. And so, no doubt, I have some differently minded clients from my mediation practice that don't like the fact that I'm a progressive Democrat. And yet, I will tell you, it was very heartwarming to see the number of conservative friends that I have that got behind me and not just encouraged me, but wrote me checks, many of them for thousands of dollars. I mean, my friends really stood up for me. And as with many endeavors in life, you'll be surprised at the people who let you down that you thought you could count on, but you'll be overwhelmed by the people you didn't know or didn't know you could count on that rush to join the fight with you and support you 110%. It's very heartwarming. But you do run a risk being a public figure, a political noise. You run a risk of alienating some people, and I'm sure I did along the way, but it was also very nice to see how many people that I knew philosophically disagree with me who nonetheless supported me in many, many different ways. So we're coming toward the end of our presentation here, and I want to wind down with just a few concluding thoughts. Let me tell you what happened in my race. Florida 2nd Congressional District Democratic primary, 57,656 votes were counted. I won 49.2% of those. I fell 912 votes short from toppling a candidate who had been in politics since he was a speechwriter for President Jimmy Carter. He had been a county commissioner in Leon County, the largest part of this congressional district, for 3 terms. He had worked in the Obama administration for 2 different agencies, and he's a lovely man, and his wife's a very wonderful woman too. And yet I came within 912 votes in my first political endeavor of beating a seasoned political veteran, and it's because I practiced all of the techniques I tell you about earlier today: hiring good staff, listening to them, raising money aggressively. You got to be willing to do these things or don't bother getting into politics. Money won't raise itself for you. I won 15 of the 19 counties in my congressional district, including the 2 smaller metropolitan counties, Bay County, which is where Panama City Beach is in, and Marion County. I just didn't win Leon County. The Tallahassee vote, the place where everyone knew my opponent because they had voted for him multiple times to sit on the Leon County Commission, they went for my opponent 3-1. So even though I took a majority of the counties, it was not enough to dilute his vote. And we knew that was going to be my problem from early on. We knew that I needed to overcome my lack of name recognition to compete with him because he was going to get a great Leon County turnout, and he did. My goodness, 93% of the folks in Leon County turned out and they voted for him 3-1. By contrast, in these rural counties, turnout was much lower, and it just wasn't enough to dilute his really strong vote. And I congratulate him on a great race, and we're friends to this day. He's a nice man. Some weird things happened along the way. Taylor County, which is where Perry is, that's adjacent to Leon County, was reporting precinct by precinct, and I was up 60-40, 55-45, 65-35, and then all of a sudden the last precinct is reported, and the supervisor of elections totally reversed it, 60-40 for my opponent, which to this day is a head scratcher. The day of the election, the governor of the state of Florida decided in his wisdom to undertake a paving project on the only road in or out of a major precinct in Wakulla County, just to the south of Leon County. Another head scratcher. And then in Marion County, Ocala area, folks in the same household, registered at the same address, got different ballots. One of them had my race on the ballot, and two of them did not. Again, to this day, can't figure out how or why that happened, but I'd like to think it would have made a difference in the outcome, but there are no perfect elections, and Florida knows that all too well. So, you know, I had to think about it before I conceded. The press was dying to get me to concede, particularly the Leon County press, where they loved my opponent. But I said, no, you know, I'm going to take the night and think about it. I have to look at a few things. I was trying to figure out whether I should push for a recount. And I thought about it, I slept on it, and although I was disappointed, I decided that the better part of valor the next morning when I woke up was for me to go ahead and concede so that my opponent could get on about the business of raising money for his general election and campaigning, rather than hold the whole race in abeyance while recounts took place. And also, as a practical matter, a recount would have been a horribly expensive endeavor. You know, supervising a recount in one county is bad enough, but supervising it in 19 counties, we just didn't have those kinds of resources at the end of the primary. And so I didn't want to go down that road, and I liked my opponent. And even though I thought I was a better candidate, I conceded to him the day after the election. And you know, I think I made a lot of friends in his camp, and should I choose to run again in the 2nd Congressional District, I think a lot of his supporters would get behind me because they appreciate the graceful exit that I made after a night just to think about the right thing to do. I loved it. It was a great experience. I may well run for Congress again in 2020, and I encourage you all to consider running for office if it's right for you. If you've got the right temperament, if you're willing to listen and learn, if you're willing to change your approach to dealing with people, if you're willing to pick up the phone and raise money and put yourself in a very uncomfortable place of raising money from folks that you haven't talked to in a long time. I mean, that part's hard. I'll tell you, you got to dig deep to succeed at campaigning, because you have to raise the money. You have to be convinced of the righteousness of your cause, and self-confident that you're the person to deliver the victory, so that the cause is won. And if you've got these traits, then I will tell you, I encourage you to consider running for office. And you don't have to run for Congress at your first time out. My gracious, I don't know why I did that. Well, I do know why, but not sure I'd recommend it to everybody. Soil and Water Conservation District Commissioner, that's a great place to start. Local city councilman, school board, these are all great places to start and groom yourself to be a good candidate for higher office, and learn how to be a public servant, and appreciate the nuances of dealing with constituents, because it's a little different than dealing with judges and clients, I assure you. So maybe in 2020, some of us will be on the ballot together. That would be very exciting. I want to thank you all today for joining me. You can see here on the last slide the Florida Bar course number, 180729-2N like November. You get 1 CLE credit for listening to today's program, Insights from a Former Congressional Candidate, How Running for Public Office Can Help You in Your Practice. And so together with Upchurch Watson White Max and the University of Florida Levin College of Law, I'd like to thank you again for joining us today. That concludes our presentation.